good morning. This is Ed Morler. You're listening to What We Need to Know. Today we have Kris Newby, engineer, medical researcher, science writer, and heavily involved in a recent award-winning documentary called Under Our Skin, which is an eye-opening film about the epidemic of Lyme disease. She takes us through an incredible story that's very interesting and incredibly informative and needed to be out there because of what's going on in the world today with regard to Lyme. So welcome, Kris.
Hi, Ed, and thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's a pleasure. After watching your documentary, I said this is something that we really do need to know about, because apparently I had some friends years ago whose wife had Lyme disease, and it was devastating. I didn't know anything about it, but I had no idea how much of an epidemic it's become recently, and I don't think most of the public does. So
I know.
First of all, let's start out. What is Lyme disease?
So Lyme disease is a set of symptoms caused by a little corkscrew-shaped bacteria, also called a spirochete, and it's commonly transmitted through the bite of a deer tick. The bacteria hangs out in the midgut of the tick, and when the tick takes a blood meal, it releases the bacteria into a body, and then the bacteria infects the skin, goes into the bloodstream. It tends to burrow into the tissue and the central nervous system, and then you have Lyme disease.
How big of a problem is it?
Well, I think it's a huge, unrecognized epidemic, and that's sort of what we determined after our 4 years of research for the film. I would say, so the CDC reports that there are about 27,000 cases in 2007, but in the fine print of their epidemiological report, they say that could be underreported by at least 10 times. And to put that into perspective, 2007 there were 57,000 cases of AIDS, and Lyme there are about over 4 times that amount. If you look at 270,000, so it's a huge epidemic, I think.
Right. Well, one of the shocking revelations in the film is the possible evidence linking Lyme with other neurological symptoms such as Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, Alzheimer's, ALS. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so early symptoms of Lyme are just like flu-like symptoms. So achy muscles and joints, you can have a fever. Sometimes there's neurological involvement, like when I got Lyme disease, I had blurry vision. And, if you get Lyme early, if you treat Lyme early with a simple course of antibiotics, almost everybody agrees it's curable. But if you sort of miss the early signs, which can be a rash or this summer flu, it can go on, the bacteria can go on and wreak havoc on a body. And some of these late-stage symptoms resemble these other syndromes like multiple sclerosis, ALS, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, and so it's very commonly misdiagnosed. That was one thing we learned during the interviews with the hundreds of patients that we talked to, is almost everyone had been misdiagnosed with one or more of these syndromes before they finally came to a correct diagnosis of Lyme disease. And then the good thing about at least finding out you have Lyme disease, it's treatable and you will improve, versus the other syndromes, which sometimes are just a slow death sentence.
So there's a lot of confusion whether or not you have Alzheimer's or multiple sclerosis, when it may not be that. It's just a similar symptom, and it's actually it's a different cause of the factor. Have I got that right?
Well, so something like MS, multiple sclerosis, that's a syndrome with a defined set of symptoms with no known cause. So, multiple sclerosis could be caused by many different things, and it's basically your nerve sheath is disrupted. So it's a demyelinization of the covering on your nerves. And that could be caused by many things, but Lyme certainly can do that in some cases. So, late-stage Lyme can be confused with many other neurological diseases.
That's part of the problem, isn't it?
Yeah, the main problem is the tests for Lyme disease are not very reliable. First of all, the CDC recommends a two-step test. There's an ELISA test followed by a Western blot test. And first of all, the ELISA test doesn't work very well in the first month because your body hasn't had a chance to create antibodies that can be measured. And then the test itself isn't very sensitive in that recent study from Johns Hopkins and one from Mayo Clinic and the state of New York say that two-step testing process can miss up to 75% of the positive cases. So, a doctor who may not be very familiar with Lyme can give you that ELISA test and you test negative, but you might actually have it. And that's why the CDC recommends that you don't just go solely on that test, that you go to an experienced clinician, physician, and your diagnosis for Lyme is based on different data points, tests, and your symptoms, and your history. Have you been in a place where Lyme is prevalent?
Well, are there, in your opinion anyway, are there definite places that are different labs that are better, different tests that are better? And if you could mention those for our audience.
So there are, I think there are, not all labs and tests for Lyme are created equal. The tests I like are from 3 different labs. One is IGENIC, which is in Palo Alto, California. That's my town, and that's spelled IGENEX. Another one on the East Coast is MDL Lab. M is in Mary, D is in dog, L is in Lisa. And then there's a new lab in Maryland that seems to be have some really good tests, and it's called Clongen, and that's in Germantown, Maryland, and that's CLONGEN. And the reason why...
Say that again? How do you spell that again?
Clongen, so CLONGEN. So the reason why I like those labs is that they test. So the alternative tests are a lot of these commercial tests that are available commonly through Quest and LabCorp, and they're FDA-approved tests, and they only include one strain of the Lyme bacteria, and from the East Coast. So, for example, if you're on the West Coast, you may test negative for their test because it's testing a different strain of the organism. And another thing is those FDA-approved tests have taken out 2 really specific markers that were taken out for the vaccine that isn't available anymore. So the labs I mentioned test for those other bands, which are really important in diagnosing Lyme.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's get back to if our audience is sitting there saying, well, like in our conversation, it was like a relative of mine has ADD symptoms, chronic migraines, muscle aches, a lot of these things that short memory problems, all sorts of neurological things. Mm-hmm. And all these have been going on chronically, and all these are also indications of possible Lyme as a source of these. Is that correct?
Yeah, and if you look at a list of all the possible symptoms of Lyme disease, it seems like every disease known to man, and it's very confusing. But after talking to lots of Lyme patients, you see a pattern there, and sort of the pattern is people with long-term untreated Lyme, they have these freaky neurological symptoms that seem to move around the body and wax and wane on sort of a 3 or 4 week cycle.